Firstly, thanks for having us. I know you didn't have a say in it, but still thank you. It's good to be here. I find it so encouraging to see a bunch of blokes kind of hanging out, sharing something of life and what's important to you as you do that around food and so forth. So tonight, really what I wanted to do is raise a few things and then just open up for questions. And because let's be honest, all the wisdom is not sitting at the front of the room right now. So my thought is that we do that and we kind of explore some space together. And I do apologise. I'll remember most of what I'm saying, but I bought my wrong glasses, so I can't actually see you if I read them. So if I use them, so I hate doing that thing where I've got to take my glasses on and off. But if I don't, you will all just be this blurry mess as I try to communicate, and I'll end up kind of getting sick because I'll kind of get nauseous from thinking about it also. So what I thought today we'd do is kind of have a bit of a look at some space around just our own journeys, that we do some space around what's important to us, and we do some space around turning points. Now, I suppose I wanted to start by, some of you may not be on social media, some of you might be, but for those of you on social media, whether it's Facebook or whatever else it is, and I don't know how many of you have ever been this. I was hearing somebody recently, if you've ever clicked on something to look at, and then all of a sudden you get all these ads for that thing, and I don't know about the rest of you, but there are times when I want to look at an article or I want to read something, even if I disagree with it, because I want to be well read and I want to look at things that I agree with, and I also want to look at things that I might disagree with, because I want to understand how people think and so forth. And one of the things I find interesting is there are times, I don't know if you do this, I look at my phone and I think, if I click that, I'm going to have to spend the next 3 days avoiding those ads and unliking them, and so sometimes I look at them, sometimes I don't. And so there's that targeted kind of ad. It was very confronting when I started getting, I don't know whether it was the age that I hit, I don't know whether, somebody told somebody at Facebook, I don't understand, but all I know is I started getting targeted ads for hair products. And that was kind of confronting, it was kind of like, what do you guys know that I don't know, sort of thing. And it reminds me of the ad, I'm assuming it's Australia-wide, forgive me if it's not, and you'll tell me in a moment, the Ashley and Martin ads. Ashley and Martin, the whole hair, regrowth kind of space. Have they been doing those ads up here, what was your turning point? Have you guys seen that at all? There's this ad, and basically what happens is some bloke's talking to camera, and the question is asked essentially, what was your turning point? What they're asking is, what was the point at which you realised you needed to come and use Ashley Martin to get, fix up your hair? And some bloke goes, I saw myself in the mirror or the security camera or whatever it happened to be. And they talk about, all of a sudden I thought, who's that old bloke? And as we get older, I don't know if I sort of still think in my head I'm about 30. Now, I know I'm not. I'm not, silly. I know I'm not 30, but there is part of me that kind of somehow, occasionally, and I don't know if people older than me do this, but every now and again I think, I could do that. I could do that.
It didn't kill him last
and then I realise I can't. Or I realise I could do it, and then I'm going to spend a fortune in physio appointments fixing my body after trying to do something like that, And anyway, so I know I started playing. My parents played baseball growing up. I played a lot of competitive baseball growing up, and when I moved back to Sydney, my cousin was playing for the team that my father started. And anyway, the long and the short is I decided to go and play with him, and I'm sitting around one, and essentially it was a chance for blokes to drink beer on a Saturday afternoon. If you know baseball, it kind of goes on for a bit, and there's innings, right? And about the third innings, you would hear this psst, as people would start drinking, and it was pretty loose. Let's be honest, it was a pretty loose kind of environment. And I was sitting around one day afterwards thinking, it's great that these old blokes are still playing. It's great, it's good that they're getting out. And then something came up about age, and my cousin and I, who are literally like 2 weeks apart in age, realised we are the oldest two blokes on this team. And somehow I thought all these old blokes were doing really well, and I realised I was the oldest of them. You know, it was pretty confronting. Well, one of the things in my life and in my working kind of life was that I was a pastor in a church. Now, some of you know what that means, some of you don't. That's okay, there's no dramas with that, whatever your experience of that is. But that's what I did. And so what it meant was, amongst a whole bunch of other stuff, I got led into some very profound moments in people's lives. The people I went and saw in Yeppoon this afternoon were a young couple. Oh, they're still young compared to me now, but they're now in their mid-30s. Lovely young couple. We helped him find Christian faith. She was part of the church, but my wife, Christian word is discipled, helped her grow up in her faith, kind of thing. If you don't understand what that means, that's okay. But it's essentially, helped her grow in her faith. We took their baptism when they were baptised. We took their wedding. We were led into very profound moments of people's lives, and it's a great privilege. It's one of the great privileges that I miss about not being in a pastoral role now. So I had the immense privilege of doing things like that. When we left the church in Bury, a younger woman said to us, "You're the only pastor I've ever known." She came to faith in the church that we ran. We baptised her. She got married to a guy in the church. I dedicated two of their only two children at that point that were alive. And one of the things that I've been really privileged about is being led into moments of approaching death or around funerals and death and so forth. And I can remember, for example, I was speaking to a man. He was dying of tumours, basically cancerous tumours, and I got the privilege of journeying with him. He was part of the church. I got the privilege of journeying with him all the way to his death. And one day I was meeting with him and his wife, and we were talking about what sort of funeral he wanted after, what sort of how did he want the service to go and things like that, because obviously it wasn't a sudden death, which meant he had the opportunity to kind of have some level of input into what it was going to look like. And I'm chatting to him, and we get to this point, and forgive me, but just to be aware, it gets to this point where you start asking some really practical questions, what do you want for this, or do you want a song, or you ask some bigger questions first. And anyway, we get to the point where it's like, well, what do you want to happen to your body after you die? Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? And if so, do you have some plans for that? And what does that look like? And he turned to me. He's a great guy. And he turns to me as well. I want to be cremated, and I want you to take my ashes and sprinkle them at Dan Murphy's, because then my wife will come and visit me once a week. and I was sitting there, because it's a profound moment, right? You're being led into this, and then I'm like some of you here are going, am I allowed to laugh at that? I'm not sure. And then I realised they were laughing at it. They thought it was great, and so it was fine. I laughed along. Well, there was a time, so I was at Bury, and Nowra was kind of the closest centre to us, which is a southern coast, and it's a bit of a regional hub for some of that region. And the hospital's down there, and I was down visiting a man, and he was dying literally for about 4 hours after my visit. He died, and I'm meeting with him, and his wife was there, and who were part of our church. I knew them very well, and we were sitting there, and he'd come from an Anglican background, and he really wanted to have communion, and so because of the church tradition that he'd come from, for him that meant having wine, right? So for some of us in different traditions, we'll have grape juice or something else. For him and his tradition, that was wine. You've never seen how weird it is at 7:30 on a Saturday morning for a pastor to try and find a bottle shop that's open in an hour. I'm literally knocking on the doors of places going, I just want one, just one, and then I'm trying to find a plastic cup, and there were a lot of people looking at me kind of going, what are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing there, son? And but then we had this profoundly personal time of communion, the three of us, and we actually used that bottle of wine. I was at a Baptist church at then, and we normally would only have grape juice, but at his funeral he wanted communion to be served, and we actually served both so that people could choose to have some wine or choose to have some grape juice, and they could choose to have the wine that Arthur had had as his last communion only a couple of hours before he left, died. Or I can think of the story of a man called Bill, old farming guy in town, and literally had been sick for a while, but was one of those guys that didn't want to go to the doctor, didn't want to do anything, and then all of a sudden literally was given a very short amount of time to live. I promise it will get more fun than this, I think. But he was there, and I was with him and his wife. They were part of the church, and I was with him and his wife in the hospital bed, and he turned to his wife of many, many, many years, and he turned to her and he goes, "Darling, we had a good life, haven't we? Thanks." And then literally about an hour and a half later he died. There's these turning point moments for people in life. And one of them is often when people come to the realisation that they may not have long to live. When they, particularly when they're told a terminal condition, you're told you have something and you're not going to recover from this. For a lot of people that I've cared for over those years, it becomes a real turning point moment for them. They start then thinking about, well, how do I want to live? What do I want to do for my kids? How do I want to live my life? They start to try and plan and be and do, because there is this significant moment for them when they're given this news that changes something for them. And they realise that their life is going to end, and that they want to do certain things, or restore relationships, or whatever it happens to be in their world, as part of a turning point moment for them in profoundly bad news. Whatever you think of the Bible, some of you will go to church, some of you may not, the Bible has some words to say, and it says in Psalm 89, it says, basically, who can live and not see death? And the reality is, we all have a terminal condition. We will all die. Now, for some of us, it might be tomorrow. For some of us, it might be in 50 years' time. But the reality is, I have and you have a terminal condition. That is, that there will come a point when we will die. And so, what I really wanted to do today is to, in light of that idea that we do all have a terminal condition, and so therefore, how do we want to live? How do we want to be remembered? And what would be important in terms of legacy and life and how to live it is really important. And to not lose that opportunity and just wait for a moment into the future when maybe we get some news that we don't like, but to actually go, well, what would it look like for me to kind of have that sitting there as part of my kind of decision-making process about life and faith and family and friends and all the other stuff. And so what I wanted to do tonight is really just share three stories, three different stories, hopefully, about some turning point moments for people, and then we kind of open it up for a few questions. And the first kind of turning point story for me is my life. As I started to share earlier, I grew up not in a Christian home. My parents are loving people, they're kind people, they treated me well. I had a good family life overall. I mean, no family life is perfect, and there's things that we all say, oh well, I wouldn't want to do what my dad or my mum did at certain points. For those of you that don't have children yet, or there is this sad reality when you realise that you say some things that your parents said. So I can remember clearly my mum and dad. I would go. Did anybody else do this, right? You'd come to Mother's Day and Father's Day, and I would say, as a young child, I would say, well, it's unfair. It's unfair. There's Mother's Day, there's Father's Day, there's no Children's Day. Did anybody else say that to their parents? A few, I said that to my parents, and what was their reply? Every day is Children's Day, and I can still remember the moment when my children basically said that to me, and I went, well, every day is Children's Day, and I went, oh, that's my father. But anyway. But my mum and dad are not followers. My mum has since become a Christian. She's become a follower of Jesus. My dad still hasn't. Although he will more than likely, if I'm speaking somewhere and it's live streamed, he will more than likely watch that and so forth. But you know, that was the home I grew up in, and so growing up in that home, I went to Sunday school once. I have the photo to prove it. You know, I was a 70s child, so I had a combination of light brown and dark brown pants and shirt, standing outside my parents' house and, you know, trotting off to Sunday school once, and that was it. And so my life primarily revolved around sport and family and holidays and those things. And when I got to high school, the local church was running this drop-in centre, which was really just a place for young people to go to. It wasn't, if you understand, it wasn't youth group, it wasn't Bible study, you could come and go, it was a very relaxed atmosphere, but it was a place that Christian people helped facilitate a space where, young people could come and they could kind of spend some space together with Christian people and, you know, get to know them a bit. Well, I did that all through high school, through the ups and downs of my schooling and my life and my, my exploring what other substances I could put in my body and so forth. And I went through all of that, going to the drop-in centre, and I surfed a lot with those guys and did some other stuff. I left school in year 10, did my trade. I was halfway through my trade. I was in my second year as my apprentice, and I got invited back by the drop-in centre to a reunion. There was a kind of a, you know, yeah, what I didn't know at the time, and for those of you in church world, you would understand, is that the church was kind of doing this whole mission thing, and so they were getting this speaker to come through, and they were doing a whole bunch of kind of things to get people to engage around faith, and this was one of them. Now, I didn't know that, and that was fine. We knew what we were going for. We knew they were Christians. We knew they would pray and they would do something as part of that. But, you know, that was fine. It wasn't bait and switch. It was fine, but that's what we did. So I turned up to this night, and a man spoke, and I remember at the end just thinking, there were two things that stood out to me as he spoke. One was, at one point he spoke about, what's my purpose in living? And I sat there as a 17-year-old young bloke going, I don't know. And even if I think I have one, I'm not quite sure it's actually worth maybe investing the rest of my life in, if that makes sense. So, you know, I think, so that was going on for me. There was this element of like, well, what am I doing here? And what am I living like? And what's important? And I don't really know the answer to that. That was part of it. And the other part of it was, it just seemed like Jesus might be good news. And I kind of went, I wouldn't mind sussing this out a little bit more. And so, you know, as churches and other groups, not just churches, sometimes do, you know, at the end of the night there was a little card, and it was like, tick a little box if you want to know more. And so I ticked a little box and said, oh, I'd be happy to chat to somebody about it. And I then went on my merry way. And so I went on my way, and I don't know, about a week later, I can't remember exactly, it would have been within a couple of weeks at least, one of the families, so there was a bunch of leaders at that drop-in centre. They would take us surfing, we did camps, I knew them well, we still would connect with them relationally, even though we were no longer going on a Friday night, you know, we had cars and driving and doing all sorts of stuff. And they called me up and said, you know, I want to come out for dinner. I said, oh yeah, that'd be great, that'd be fantastic. And so I went round. That was not unusual to go round. I mean, I didn't do it every week, but it wasn't a hugely unusual thing to go round. And I went round, and anyway, after dinner, they basically just at some point went, you tick that little box, do you want to talk about it? And I went, oh yeah, well, you know, they were friends, I wasn't threatened by that conversation, it wasn't we were talking about it at our table before, it wasn't a Bible bashing kind of thing, it was just a genuine question around life and faith and whether I wanted to talk about that, and I said, yes, that'd be great, and so we did. And I can remember two things about that night. I can remember, and that is, you know, I can't, roughly, I don't know, 30 years ago or something now, more than that, 35, maybe a bit more years ago. And I can still remember two things about, I can't remember how long ago it was, that's weird, but I can remember two things clearly about that night. One was, I actually wasn't sometimes Christians can explain the whole Christian message and it becomes about being afraid of where you might go after you die. That actually wasn't my experience. I'm not saying it's not real, I'm just saying that wasn't what drove me. What drove me was, I just thought Jesus might be good news. And I just sort of thought, that's actually different than the kind of Jesus I actually thought there was. And the second thing was, I was intrigued and I was drawn into exploring about Jesus. The second thing was that I got in the car and I turned off the radio because I was, you know when you leave something in your mind spinning, you know what I'm talking about? Like you just kind of go, oh wow, what, you know. Anyway, I got in the car, turned the radio off, and I started driving off to my home. And anyway, at some point in my head, I think, you know when you're trying to think too much and your head starts to explode, and you just go, I'm going to switch off for a bit. I just need to kind of switch off. And so I switched off, and anyway, at one point I started singing. Now, this becomes a generational thing. Some of you will know this song, and some of you will go, I think I heard my grandparents talking about it, and some of you will go, I think I heard my kids talking about it. But there was a song by George Thorogood and the Delaware Destroyers. Does anybody remember that band, George Thorogood? And it was called Bad to the Bone. And I remember I started singing that song. And eventually I kind of went, oh, I've had enough of trying to think about this. And I turned on the radio. And I was exactly up to where it was on the radio. And I kind of went, well, that's sort of weird, isn't it? And those two things combined were the start of my journey, or they weren't the start because it was before that, but that was a significant moment for my journey of faith, my turning point as it was. Because for me, life turned around at that point. It changed my entire world. Now, for some of you, faith will change part of your world, it will change who you are, but it might not change everything about where you live and what you do and all those sorts of things. But for me, that was the start of a turning point for my life. And for me, it wasn't that some people come to faith differently, and you might know some of those people, you might be one of them. I took just a series of steps over a number of months where I kept just wanting to explore Jesus. And each step drew me closer to saying yes to him. And actually at some point I turned around and I realised the step to say no, the step of faith to say no, was actually a bigger step of faith than to say yes. Because I'd actually experienced enough of him to go, you know, I'd started here and I'd kind of come over to here and I had another step to go, but it was like the step backwards was actually bigger than the step forwards. That was my turning point. And it's changed my life. I would like to say it has made my life completely perfect, that I no longer struggle with sin or doubt or, you know, anything like that. I would like to say that I've had no hardships in life, but that hasn't been my experience. But my turning point with Jesus was significant in my life. So that's story number one. Story number two for me is a story that's found in the Bible. Again, some of you will know this, some of you may not, doesn't matter either way. But there's a series of, there's these three stories put together. We're only going to talk about one of them very briefly, but there's these three stories put together in the Bible, and they're all about something that was lost being found. It's in Luke chapter 15. You can look it up for yourself at a different time. But in Luke chapter 15, there are these three stories of something that was lost being found. And the first two are kind of inanimate objects that were lost and are found. Still significant, but you know. And the third one is what you might have heard of as the prodigal son, is described as the prodigal son. Now, most of you will know the story pretty well, and I'm not going to explain it in detail. If you want to read it for yourself, I encourage you, Luke chapter 15. You'll find it there and you can read it. But most of you will know the story enough to go, the son wants the father dead. He wants his inheritance, he wants his father dead so he can have his money and he can move on with life. He goes to dad and says, basically, I want you dead, I want your money. And the dad says, okay. Like, profound to me as a father. I can't begin to imagine that. One of our children had a very difficult teenage years, and I think we still bear some of the scars of that, as some of you might. Sorry, I still bear some of the scars of that, as you might for your own children. We're in a great space now. He's in a wonderful space now, but it wasn't always that way. And he said some profoundly hurtful things to me at different points of my parenting journey, but he's never said that. Pretty cool. The son comes, says that to the dad, gets the money, gets the inheritance, and goes off. And we know the story. Squanders it while living. Prostitutes. All this stuff. He goes into squanders it all, and he comes out the other end, and life really hasn't turned out the way he thought. It's a bit like I was asked earlier, and I'm still trying to remember the quote Carl said last night. And I feel bad that I've heard that talk a few times, so I can't remember it, but it's like success isn't everything it's matched up to be. So Carl said it better than that, but it was this idea that sometimes we get success and then we realise it's actually much more shallow and hollow than we thought it was going to be. The son has all the money, does all the things, and realises it's not really worked out, and it tells us that he's starving to death, and he thinks to himself, basically, if I go home and I work on my father's farm, maybe he'll give me the slops that the pigs eat, and I'll have something in my belly. And so he turns to come home. And he's coming home, and the Bible basically says that Jesus is explaining the story. He says, and basically what happens is the father sees the son a long way off. And does anybody remember what the father does? He runs to him, and he embraces him. I think one of the most profound images in the Bible is a father who would run and embrace his wayward son. And there's an account where people who study the Bible, scholars, were trying to figure out how this account played out in ancient times. Like we know what it might mean for us, right? But what does it mean for ancient times? And they were talking to this bunch of essentially nomadic herders that lived a very, it's not the same because it was more modern times, but a similar cultural experience to what Jesus was kind of talking to. And they share the story in Luke chapter 15, and these people are absolutely, like their shock and horror is not at what the son did. Their shock and horror is what the father did. Because he disgraces himself by running to his son and embracing him and restoring him. Because it's like, how would you do? No, you've got to punish. You've got to, your son needs to be, do you know what I'm trying to get at? Like, for them, the son should have been punished and made, and all this sort of stuff. And in the Bible, Jesus uses this account that there is this running to him and this embracing and all this sort of stuff. And the Bible goes on to say he's restored and all that sort of stuff. In this account, this young man has a turning point moment when he realised that his success, his life hadn't worked out, and that maybe there was something more and something better if he returned to his father's house. And the point of it is to essentially say, in God's eyes, if we've run away, the minute we start to return, God runs to us and he embraces us and he forgives us and he restores us. And the turning point was simply a son who thought, I want to go home to the father because maybe it could be better there. Turning point story number 2. Turning point story number 3. Which one? Carl shared a little bit of it last night. Some of you might have been there, some of you weren't. I think I'll share in our series, Faith Runs Deep, which is essentially a whole bunch of testimony stories of people from history and today in Australia. There's 30-odd people interviewed, woven together in a series of topics around faith and life and in Australian politics. One story in there is a Vietnamese young man who, I won't share it for long because Carl shared it last night, but I'll share another one as well. Vietnamese young man, because there's 2 stories, just 2 quick ones I'll do here. The Vietnamese young man parents were boat people, refugees, working hard, life goes pear-shaped, the young bloke ends up selling drugs in prison, comes out, just gets better at selling drugs, a whole bunch of stuff going on for him. And he comes to this point of wanting to die for a bunch of reasons, and anyway, he had this kind of latent Catholic background in his life, and so he goes down to the local church and he prays, and he basically says to God, like, you know, I can't cope, help me, sort of thing. If you and the line that his end kind of quote was essentially, God, if you're there, show me. God, if you're there, show me. And so he goes down and he does that, and he says, give me a sign. And there's no sign. You know, there was a helpful moment for him. If you see the series, he actually talks about that was a helpful moment for him in terms of a range of things, but there was no big, you know, sign. And the next day he's walking through the part of Cabramatta in the mall, and these guys give him a pamphlet, and he opens it up and he says, if you're asking for the pamphlet says, if you're looking for a sign from God, this is it. And that was his turning point moment. Now, there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened out of that point, and you know, all that sort of stuff. But this turning point moment for a young man who came and said, God, if you're real, show me. And God showed him. A bit like a young bloke sitting in a car going, God, if you're real, show me. Start singing a song. Now, that's not a proof in and of itself, but it was part of the journey for me. The last really quick story is a guy called Duncan Brown. Some of you may know Duncan. He's in agribusiness these days, lives north of Toowoomba kind of way, does a whole bunch of stuff in regional communities. Some of you might know him. Duncan shares his testimony, some of his story in the series. But what I want to focus on is actually not Duncan, and he doesn't talk about it much in the series. He does in another short series we have called Next Steps. It's on our website and so forth. And in the story, in Duncan's account, he becomes a Christian. It matters, but it doesn't matter in this story. And anyway, he's pastoring a church, and his dad, who is not yet a believer, not yet a follower of Jesus, has started coming a bit to the church. You know, just check it out, that sort of stuff. And anyway, he's doing these baptisms, and if most of you might know, but a baptism can look a few different ways depending on the kind of church tradition you might come from. In the tradition that Duncan was from, that involves full immersion as an adult, as a believer. And so essentially, if you haven't seen it, there's a pool out the front or in a body of water somewhere, and you go down and you get fully dunked under and you come out the other side. Sort of. And Duncan's getting ready to do some baptisms in the church, and his dad goes to him, well, can I get baptised? Yeah, his dad's like 89, and Duncan's not even sure his dad's said yes to following Jesus, but he somehow wants to be baptised. And so he sits down and talks with his dad, and he goes, you know, what does this mean for you? And, you know, starts chatting it through, and comes to realise that somewhere in the journey of the last bunch of years, his dad has actually come to personal faith in Christ. A bit like me, but maybe a slower journey. He's just kind of been moving along these steps, and maybe for some of you tonight, it's a bit like that. There's this sense in which you kind of you don't remember a time when you said yes, but you've kind of just been walking this path, and you look back and you kind of go, wait up, I'm a lot further along this road than I thought I might have been. And anyway, Duncan's father, at like I think it's 89 or something like that years old, comes to faith, gets baptised. And the point of it is, it's never too late. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're 17 like I was, or in your 90s or 80s, or it doesn't matter. What matters is there are turning point moments where people who have come over a whole bunch of years and found that Jesus is who he says he is, and has done what he said he's done. Because that was my question. Jesus, if you have done this, if this is if this story is real, I want to know, because it's the most amazing news I've ever been told. And that was my journey. That maybe to pick up the prodigal story, maybe there's a good father that actually isn't ready to belt you over the head, but actually is ready to embrace you. And so I suppose my question to you, to leave you with, my thought process in that is to say, I'm speaking with, not to, with a bunch of people, a bunch of blokes who all have a terminal condition. So let's use that space wisely to ponder who Jesus is and the difference he could maybe make in your life, as he made in mine, as he's made in many people in this room, and as he's made in the series that we have. Thanks so much for listening. I might stop there, and I'm not quite sure how it works from here, but we can have questions, comments. I clearly do not believe that I am by any means the smartest or most godly or wisest person in this room, but if you've got a question or something you'd like to respond to, and I am completely okay if you want to stand up and push back on anything that I've said too, because again, I think that that's a really healthy thing, and I promise to not, chop your head off, so to speak, if you want to push back on stuff that I've said too.